Princess Elin sat quietly in her royal chambers, staring out of the large window of the Vriken palace. Her people, the Vrykens, were known across the galaxy for their strength and fearlessness. Every warrior in her kingdom was trained to fight and conquer, yet Elin had never felt like one of them. Unlike her father, King Maldrak the Unyielding, she was weak. Her body was frail, and her strength was far below the standard of a true Vryken. Her hands shook when she tried to lift a sword, and when she stepped into the training arena. The soldiers would look at her with pity. It was a cruel reality, one that she could never escape. "Your Highness," a voice interrupted her thoughts. It was her personal attendant, Zara, who entered the room. She bowed low. "The king requests your presence." Elin sighed and stood up. She knew what this meant. Her father never asked for her presence unless there was something important to discuss, something that usually ended in disappointment for her. She walked slowly down the long corridors of the palace, her heart heavy with dread. As she approached the throne room, she saw the two guards standing by the doors. They opened them without a word, and she entered. King Maldrak sat on his throne, looking as imposing as ever. His dark, armor-like skin gleamed under the golden light of the room. He was the strongest warrior in the empire, a king who led by power and fear. No one dared to challenge his rule. "Father," Elin said quietly, lowering her head in respect. "Sit," he commanded. Elin obediently sat on the low chair in front of him. She waited for him to speak, her nerves tightening. "I've made a decision," the king said, his deep voice cold and harsh. "You are to be sent to the Terran Union." Elin's heart skipped a beat. The Terran Union was a growing human empire, known for its military might and advanced technology. Many Vryken leaders had spoken of forging alliances with the humans, but it had never been an easy task. Why would her father send her there? "To the humans?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Maldrak's eyes narrowed. "You are weak, Elin. You cannot defend the empire, and you are of no use to me here." He paused, letting his words sink in. "This is your chance to prove your worth to the galaxy. The Terrans are powerful. You will learn from them." Elin felt her throat tighten, her eyes stinging. Her father had always been hard on her, but this was different. He had given up on her completely. She wasn't sure whether to be angry or hurt. "But father, Enough," he snapped, cutting her off. "You are to be sent as part of a political treaty. The humans will not see you as a threat, and that is exactly what I need. You will stay there and learn how to become strong. Perhaps their training will do what mine could not." Elin opened her mouth to protest, but no words came. She had heard the rumors. Her father was planning to form alliances with the Terrans to strengthen his empire. But sending her away like this felt like a punishment, a way to rid himself of her without causing an uproar. King Maldrak stood up, his heavy boots thundering against the floor as he walked toward the window. "I expect nothing from you, Elin. You will return only when you have proven yourself. Until then, you are to stay with the humans, and stay out of my way." Elin's heart sank as she stared at her father's back. He had never been warm or kind, but this was something else. She wasn't sure if she could ever prove herself to him, or if she even wanted to. But one thing was clear: she would have to go. There was no other choice. Later that day, Elin was escorted to the ship that would take her to the human world. She had packed only a few things, a few dresses, some personal items, and left behind the world she had known her entire life. The journey ahead was uncertain, and her mind raced with questions. Would the humans accept her? Would she be seen as the weakling she had always been? Could she really learn from them and become stronger? The ship was large, its sleek silver body reflecting the distant stars as it lifted off from the Vryken homeworld. Elin stood by the window, watching her planet shrink into the distance. She felt a strange mixture of fear and hope. She had no idea what awaited her on the other side, but she knew one thing for sure: this was the beginning of something new. And she would have to face it, no matter how uncertain or terrifying it might be. Lynn stepped off the ship and onto the human planet, her heart pounding in her chest. She had traveled far from the home she knew, arriving at a world full of strange sounds, new scents, and sights that made her feel small and uncertain. The Terran Union was a vast empire, but unlike the Vrikan people, the humans were not known for their physical strength alone. They were a different kind of power, intelligent, clever, and unafraid to take risks. The ground beneath her feet was solid but unfamiliar, and the tall buildings that towered overhead seemed to stretch endlessly toward the sky. It was nothing like the stone and metal structures of the Vrikan Palace, and yet it felt alive in its own way. There were so many people walking quickly, talking to each other, some even rushing past without giving her a second glance. "Welcome to Earth," a human voice said from beside her. Lynn turned to see a man standing there, wearing a uniform she recognized as part of the Terran military. His dark hair was cropped short, and his eyes were sharp, scanning her up and down in a way that felt uncomfortable. She had been expecting the humans to be different, but she had no idea how different they truly were. "I am Commander Jack Harper," the man introduced himself with a firm handshake. His grip was strong, and his eyes were filled with intensity. "You'll be staying with me. We've got a lot of work ahead." Lynn nodded quietly, unsure of what to say. She had read about humans in the Vrikan archives, but reading about them was nothing like meeting them in person. They were so different from her people. The Vrikans respected strength above all else. The stronger you were, the more power you had. But these humans, they didn't seem to care much about power in the way her people did. They looked at everything differently. "Follow me," Jack said, turning on his heel and heading toward a sleek military vehicle. "We've got a lot to cover before you start your training." Lynn followed him, her mind racing with questions. What kind of training was she supposed to undergo here? How would humans train her to become strong when her own people had failed to do so? The ride was quiet, with Jack occasionally speaking in short, sharp sentences about the basics of human military life. He explained that humans fought in groups, worked as a team, and depended on each other's strengths. "No one is an island," he said. "Strength comes from unity, Lynn. It's not just about what you can do alone." When they arrived at the military base, Lynn was taken aback by the size of it. Rows upon rows of soldiers were training on the field, sparring, running drills, and practicing combat techniques. They moved with precision, working together as a single, well-oiled machine. Jack led her to the training area, where a small group of soldiers was waiting. Lynn couldn't help but feel a twinge of fear. These humans were fast, focused, and their movements were nothing like the slow, ceremonial combat of the Vrikans. She had no idea how she would fit in here, or if she could even keep up. "All right, Lynn," Jack said, turning to her. "This is your first lesson. You will train with these soldiers, and you will do everything they do. No exceptions." Lynn nodded, trying to steady her nerves. She had always been told that her weakness was her greatest flaw. Her frailty, her lack of confidence. It had all kept her from being the warrior her father had wanted. But now, in this strange new world, she had to find a way to become strong. The soldiers led her through basic drills, starting with running. They moved quickly, their legs pumping with practiced speed, while Lynn struggled to keep up. Her body was not built for endurance. She felt her muscles burn with the effort, and she could hear the other soldiers whispering among themselves. Was she really capable of keeping up with them? "Come on, Lynn, keep moving." Jack's voice rang out, sharp and demanding. "This isn't just physical. It's mental. Don't let your doubts control you." His words stung, but they also pushed her forward. She didn't want to disappoint him. She didn't want to fail in front of these humans, these strangers who had never seen what the Vrikans were capable of. She had to prove something, not just to her father, but to herself. By the end of the day, Lynn was exhausted. Her body ached in ways she had never felt before. The humans were strong in ways that were different from the Vrikans, but they were still strong. And they had one thing that Alin didn't: confidence. They moved like they believed in themselves, even when things were difficult. That night, Alin lay in her quarters, staring at the ceiling. She felt more lost than ever. Was this really the training she needed? Would it be enough to make her stronger? Would her father ever see her as anything more than the weak princess he had sent away? But as she closed her eyes, she couldn't help but remember Jack's words. Strength comes from unity. Maybe the key wasn't to be like the Vrykins. Maybe, just maybe, there was a different kind of strength here. A strength that didn't come from fighting alone, but from fighting together. And Alin was starting to realize that this was just the beginning. The days turned into weeks, and Alin's training with the humans grew more intense. Each morning, she would wake up before the sun, her muscles sore from the day before, but the feeling of exhaustion was different now. It was no longer just weakness. It was the kind of tiredness that came from pushing herself harder than ever before. Commander Jack Harper had made it clear from the start. There was no room for failure. She was not a guest here. She was a soldier, and soldiers needed to be strong, mentally and physically. Every day, he would test her limits. Whether it was running miles, lifting weights far beyond her normal strength, or learning to fight in ways that were completely foreign to her, Alin found herself constantly struggling to keep up. But something was changing inside her. Alin's alien body, which had always seemed frail and weak to her, was adapting. Slowly, she began to feel her muscles growing stronger. Her movements became sharper. The alien energy that flowed within her, something her father had dismissed as useless, was starting to make sense. It gave her an edge, a power that humans didn't possess. Her senses were heightened, her strength increasing, and her speed improving with every passing day. During one of their training sessions, Alin was paired with another soldier, a tall, muscular man named Marcus. He was known for his quick reflexes and sharp instincts. Jack had ordered him to spar with Alin to see how much she had improved. Alin was nervous, but there was no turning back now. The fight started with Marcus rushing toward her, aiming to land a quick punch. Alin dodged it easily, her movements almost too fast for him to follow. She didn't know how she did it. It was as if her body moved before her mind could catch up. Not bad, Jack called from the sidelines, watching intently. But don't get cocky. Stay focused, Alin. Marcus came at her again, this time with a sweeping kick. Alin saw it coming in time, but her legs were slower than her mind. She tried to jump out of the way, but the kick caught her on the side. She fell to the ground with a grunt of pain, her body aching from the impact. Get up, Jack yelled. Pain is part of the process. You want to be strong. You have to push through it. Alin gritted her teeth and forced herself to stand, shaking off the pain. She had fallen before, many times, but this was different. She wasn't going to quit. The fight continued, and this time, Alin was more prepared. She used the pain in her side as fuel, pushing herself harder. With a sudden burst of speed, she ducked under Marcus's attack and landed a hit on his chest that made him stumble back in surprise. The other soldiers watching from the sidelines gasped in amazement. That's it, Jack shouted. That's the spirit, Alin. Alin felt a surge of pride. For the first time in her life, she wasn't just being weak. She was fighting back. She was becoming stronger. As the days went by, Alin's progress continued. She could now run longer distances without feeling completely exhausted. She could lift heavier weights without faltering. And when Jack put her through combat training, she was no longer the awkward, uncertain girl who had stumbled through her first sparring session. She was a fighter, still learning, still growing, but a fighter nonetheless. However, with every step she took toward becoming stronger, Alin felt a growing pressure. The Vrykin part of her, the part that had always been unsure of her place in the world, was still there. She had never been accepted by her people. Her father had cast her aside, believing her to be weak and useless. She had been sent to the humans to learn their ways. But deep down, she knew she wasn't just learning to fight. She was learning to prove her worth, not just to them, but to herself. One evening, after a particularly tough training session, Aline sat on the edge of the training ground, her breath coming in heavy gasps. Her body was drenched in sweat, her muscles aching, but there was a feeling inside her she hadn't had before. It wasn't just pain. It was determination. "You're doing well," Jack said as he approached her, his voice softer than usual. "I've been watching you, Aline. You're stronger than you think. You've got something they didn't teach you back home. Something your father couldn't see." Aline looked up at him, her eyes wide with surprise. "Do you really think I can become stronger?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jack nodded. "I've seen it. You've got the potential, but only you can unlock it. Only you can decide how far you're willing to go." Aline sat in silence for a long time, her mind racing. She had always been told that she was weak. She had always been compared to her father, a king known for his strength and unyielding power. She had always been told that she wasn't enough. But now, for the first time, she felt like she could be more. Not just for the humans, not just for her father, but for herself. She was beginning to understand Jack's words. Strength was not just about power. It was about the will to keep going. And Aline was starting to realize that, maybe, she had that strength inside her all along. The only question now was, how far could she go? The sun was beginning to set as Aline wiped the sweat from her brow, looking over the horizon. The air smelled different here, like fresh grass and metal. The Terran base was a world away from the palace she had once known, but she had slowly begun to call it home. Commander Jack Harper had been pushing her harder than ever, and Aline was beginning to see why. She had become stronger, both in body and mind. But there was still a long way to go. Today, Jack had announced a new challenge, one that made her stomach twist, with both excitement and fear. It wasn't going to be another training session. It was a real mission. "You've been doing well, Aline," Jack had told her earlier, his voice stern but not unkind. "But this isn't just about learning. It's about proving you can survive. You're going on a mission with a team of humans. We're heading to the border of Terran space. There's a planet under attack, and we need to respond." Aline nodded quietly. She had been through basic training, but she had never faced something like this before. This was no simulation. This was real. Lives were at stake. As they boarded the transport ship, the weight of the mission hit her. She sat beside Jack, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her mind racing. Was she really ready for this? Could she, the fragile princess from a far-off planet, make a difference? The trip to the battlefield was long. As the ship neared the planet, Aline could feel the tension in the air. The Terran soldiers around her were focused, their faces set in determined lines. They had been through battles before, but Aline wasn't like them. She had never fought in a real war. When the ship finally touched down on the surface, Aline stepped out into a landscape that looked like something out of a nightmare. Smoke rose from the distant horizon, and the air was thick with dust. Buildings were burning, and the sounds of distant gunfire echoed in the distance. "This is where you'll learn what you're truly made of," Jack said, his voice low. He handed her a weapon, a Terran rifle, much smaller than the weapons of her people, but still powerful in its own way. "Stay close to the team, and do as I say. Keep your head down. The enemy won't show mercy." Aline nodded, feeling the weight of the rifle in her hands. It felt unfamiliar, but she was ready to try. She had trained for this. She had learned the techniques, the strategies. Now it was time to put everything into practice. The team moved quickly, advancing through the war-torn city. Aline's heart was pounding in her chest, but she forced herself to stay calm. She was no longer the frightened princess who had stepped off the ship weeks ago. She was a soldier. She could do this. They reached a building that seemed to be a safe point for the enemy. Jack signaled for them to halt. Aline crouched down behind cover, her eyes scanning the area. She could hear the enemy soldiers moving around, but she couldn't see them. She had to stay focused. She had to trust her training. Suddenly, a blast of energy fired from the distance, narrowly missing the group. Ellen's heart raced as she crouched lower, her rifle raised. The enemy had spotted them. "Return fire," Jack shouted. The battle had begun. Ellen fired her rifle, her shots hitting their mark. She could feel the power of the weapon in her hands, and for the first time, she didn't hesitate. She wasn't just trying to survive anymore. She was fighting back. She was fighting for something. The fight lasted for what felt like hours, but in reality, it was only minutes. Ellen could feel the adrenaline surging through her veins, making her faster, stronger. The fear that had once held her back was gone. She was no longer afraid of the unknown. She had found a new strength inside her, one that was born from the courage to act. As the battle raged on, Ellen found herself face to face with one of the enemy soldiers. He was taller than her, his armor heavy and dark. She could see the look of surprise in his eyes as she raised her rifle. For a split second, everything seemed to slow down. This was it, the moment she had been waiting for. Without thinking, Ellen fired. The soldier crumpled to the ground, and Ellen's heart skipped a beat. She had done it. She had survived her first real battle. When the fighting was over, Ellen stood among the team, her breathing heavy but steady. Her hands shook slightly, but she felt a sense of pride that she had never known before. She had proven herself, not just to the humans, but to herself. Jack walked up to her, his eyes scanning her carefully. "You did good, Ellen. You kept your head. That's what matters." Ellen felt a small smile tug at her lips. She had made it through. She had done more than just survive. She had fought. And she had won. As the team returned to base, the weight of what had happened began to sink in. The battle had been fierce, but it had also been a turning point. Ellen was no longer the weak princess who had been sent to the humans to learn. She was a warrior, one who had fought and proven her worth. But there was more to come. This was just the beginning. Days after the battle, Ellen's thoughts lingered on what had happened. The fight had changed her. It wasn't just about strength or skill. It was about something deeper. She had found a new part of herself, one that had been hidden away for so long. Her time with the humans was beginning to show results. Her body was stronger, faster. Her reflexes were sharper. And though the Vrikan culture had taught her to value individual power, the humans had taught her the value of teamwork. She had learned how to fight with others, not just for herself. But there was something else that Ellen could feel stirring inside her. It wasn't just the rush of victory from the battle. It was the constant pressure of proving herself. She wasn't just fighting to be strong anymore. She was fighting to be accepted. To show her father, the king of the Vrykans, that she wasn't weak. That night, Ellen lay awake in her quarters, staring at the ceiling. The sound of distant alarms and soldiers' voices echoed outside. She had earned her place here among the humans, but there were still doubts in her mind. Would the Vrykans ever see her as more than the failure they thought she was? The door to her quarters opened quietly, and Jack stepped inside. Ellen sat up, surprised by the unexpected visit. "I didn't mean to disturb you," Jack said, his voice softer than usual. "But I wanted to check in. How are you feeling after the mission?" Ellen hesitated. She had been focused so much on her training and her desire to prove herself that she hadn't stopped to think about how she truly felt. "I feel stronger," she said slowly, "but there's still a part of me that wonders if I'll ever be enough." Jack nodded, understanding. "You're stronger than you think, Ellen. You've come a long way, but don't carry that weight of doubt around with you. You don't have to prove anything to anyone. Not to the Vrykans, not to me, and certainly not to yourself." Ellen looked at him, surprised by his words. "But I have to prove it. I can't be weak. I can't be the failure they always thought I was." Jack sat down next to her. "You're not a failure. You're a warrior now. But you need to fight for the right reasons. Strength isn't about proving something to others. It's about proving it to yourself. It's about knowing who you are and owning that power. Elaine listened carefully, feeling something shift inside her. For the first time, she realized that Jack wasn't just talking about physical strength. He was talking about inner strength, the kind of strength that didn't rely on validation from others, but on the quiet confidence that comes from accepting yourself. The next day, Elaine went through her training with renewed focus. She wasn't just fighting to become strong. She wasn't fighting to earn approval. She was fighting because it felt right. She was learning to trust herself, to trust the new warrior she was becoming. But just when she thought she was starting to understand herself, another test came her way. Jack approached her that afternoon with a new challenge. "Elaine," he said, "we have a mission coming up. A different kind of mission." Elaine looked up, her curiosity piqued. "What kind of mission?" "We need to negotiate with a new alien species. They're close to joining the Terran Union, but they're cautious. We need someone who understands the Vrikan way of doing things, someone who can show them the power of unity, strength, and leadership." Elaine's heart skipped a beat. "You want me to go?" Jack nodded. "You've been training with us long enough. I think you're ready for this. This isn't a battle. It's about leadership, diplomacy. It's about showing them what you've learned." Elaine was taken aback. She had never seen herself as a diplomat. She had always been a warrior, not someone who would speak and negotiate. But she could see why Jack had chosen her. She had learned from the humans, learned what true strength meant. It wasn't just about physical power. It was about the power to lead, to inspire others to fight for something bigger than themselves. Elaine stood up, her mind racing. She felt a mixture of fear and excitement. This was another test. A test that would challenge her in ways she had never been challenged before. "You're not just a warrior anymore, Elaine," Jack said, his voice calm. "You've become a leader, and it's time to show the world what you're capable of." Elaine took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his words. This mission would be different. There would be no guns, no battles to win. Instead, it would be a chance to show the galaxy that she was more than just the daughter of a king. She was her own person now, someone who could stand on her own 2 feet. The next day, Elaine and Jack boarded a transport ship bound for the alien world. The planet was nothing like Earth or the Vrikan homeworld. It was a jungle planet, covered in thick foliage and wild animals. The alien species they were about to meet had never been seen by Terran eyes, and their customs were mysterious. As the ship touched down, Elaine felt a wave of nervousness wash over her. She wasn't sure what to expect, but she knew one thing. She wasn't the same person who had arrived on Earth months ago. She had grown stronger, both in body and spirit. She had learned what it meant to be a warrior and a leader. And no matter what happened on this mission, she was ready to face it head-on. Lynn stepped off the transport ship, her boots sinking slightly into the thick, moist earth beneath her. The jungle was alive with sounds, strange birds calling to each other, insects buzzing in the air, and the rustling of unseen creatures moving through the dense foliage. The air was thick with humidity, but Elaine barely noticed. Her mind was focused on the task ahead. Jack stood beside her, his eyes scanning the environment with practiced caution. "Stay sharp," he said quietly. "These people are different. They value strength, but not in the way you're used to. This is about proving you can lead, not just fight." Elaine nodded, feeling the weight of his words. She had fought in battles, survived challenges, and earned the respect of the humans. But this was something entirely new. She wasn't going to be holding a weapon or leading a charge into battle. She was going to have to use her words, her presence, and the leadership skills she had learned from both the humans and her own people. The alien species they were meeting were called the Quesseri. They were a tall, insectoid race with sleek black exoskeletons and large, expressive eyes. Their society was built on respect for leaders who could prove their strength through wisdom, strategy, and unity. Elaine knew that if she was going to succeed, she would have to find a way to connect with them, not as a warrior, but as a leader. They walked deeper into the jungle, following a winding path that seemed to be laid out just for them. It wasn't long before they reached a clearing, and in the center stood a massive structure made of dark stone, covered in vines and moss. The Quasari had built their home among the trees, blending into the environment with an almost eerie sense of harmony. The leader of the Quasari, a tall figure with a shimmering black exoskeleton and a crown-like crest on his head, stepped forward to greet them. His eyes studied Elin for a long moment, his antennae twitching as he took in her presence. "I am Shirk, chief of the Quasari," the alien said, his voice deep and resonant. "You come to us with the Terran forces. But what is it that you seek, Vriken?" Elin took a step forward, feeling the weight of Shirk's gaze upon her. She could feel Jack watching her, waiting to see how she would handle this moment. This was her chance to prove herself. She wasn't here to fight. She was here to lead. "We seek peace," Elin said, her voice steady but firm. "We believe that your strength can join ours. Together, we can protect each other from the dangers that lie beyond our borders. But to do that, we must work together." Shirk's eyes narrowed slightly, his antennae flicking back and forth. "Peace?" he asked, his tone skeptical. "Strength is the only language we understand. What makes you think your words will convince us? What makes you strong enough to lead?" Elin took a deep breath. She had expected this. The Quasari were not impressed by easy promises. They wanted to see her prove herself. She could feel her pulse quicken as the pressure mounted, but she refused to let it show. "I am strong because I have learned that true strength is not just in fighting," Elin said, her voice rising with confidence. "True strength is in unity. It is in bringing others together, not forcing them apart. It is in understanding that we are all stronger when we stand together, not when we fight alone." She paused, looking Shirk in the eye. "I may not look like a leader to you. I may not have the same power as your warriors. But I know what it means to be strong. I know what it means to fight for something bigger than yourself." Shirk studied her for a long time, his expression unreadable. Elin could feel the weight of his judgment pressing down on her. This was the moment that would decide everything. She couldn't afford to fail now. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Shirk spoke again. "You speak of strength and unity," he said, "but can you prove it? Can you show me that you are more than just words? That you are worthy of leading, not just commanding?" Elin's heart skipped a beat. This was it. She had to prove herself, not just to Shirk, but to everyone watching. She stepped forward, her mind racing, and then she did something she hadn't planned. She reached down, touching the ground beneath her feet, and let the energy of the planet flow through her. The Quasari were deeply connected to the world around them, able to draw power from the earth. Elin had learned that the Vriken people also had a deep connection to nature, though it was something they had long forgotten in their search for power. She had found her connection to this world, and it was strong. "I can prove it," she said, her voice calm but strong. "Through this connection, I can show you the power of unity. I can show you that the strength of a people is not just in their weapons, but in their hearts." She closed her eyes, focusing on the energy flowing around her. Slowly, the ground began to tremble, and a soft glow surrounded her hands. The Quasari watched in silence, their eyes wide with surprise. Elin could feel the power of the planet coursing through her, a strength that came from both her people's legacy and her new understanding of unity. Shirk took a step back, clearly impressed. "You have shown us something," he said, his voice filled with awe. "Perhaps there is more to you than I believed." Elin opened her eyes, the glow fading from her hands. She felt the power of the earth settle back into the ground beneath her feet. She had done it. She had proven that strength came not just from fighting, but from understanding. "We are not so different, you and I," she said, her voice calm but filled with certainty. "Together, we can stand against whatever comes. Together, we are stronger." Shirk's antennae twitched, and he nodded slowly. "Perhaps you are right, Vriken. Perhaps it is time to unite." The days after the meeting with the Quasari were a blur for Elin. The deal was struck, and the Terrans had secured an alliance with the alien species. But Alin knew that the true challenge was just beginning. She had succeeded in one of the greatest tests of her leadership, but it had been only the first step towards something much larger. The alliance between the Terrans and the Quesari was just the beginning. Alin had proven to herself that she was no longer just a princess or a warrior in training. She was a leader, someone who could make decisions that affected the fate of entire worlds. Yet, as the celebrations following the successful negotiations died down, Alin found herself standing on the balcony of the Terran base, looking out at the stars. The weight of responsibility pressed down on her, heavier than any battle had. She had done her people proud, but now she had to live up to the promise of her new role. It was no longer just about surviving or proving herself. It was about building something lasting. Jack stepped out onto the balcony, his footsteps soft against the metal floor. He stood beside her, looking up at the stars too. "You did it," Jack said quietly, his voice full of respect. "You've earned their trust and ours. The Terrans, the Quesari, even your own people will have to take notice of what you've done." Alin didn't answer immediately. Her thoughts were elsewhere, lost in the vastness of space. "But what comes next?" she asked finally, her voice tinged with uncertainty. "I've done what was asked of me, but there's so much more to be done, so much more to prove." Jack turned to her, his eyes serious. "You don't have to prove anything to anyone anymore, Alin. You've already done that. You've shown everyone what you're capable of." Alin met his gaze. His words gave her some comfort, but deep down, she knew he was right. She had proven herself. She had overcome her doubts, her fears, and had earned the respect of two very different peoples. But the journey wasn't over. It was only just beginning. "I don't know if I'm ready for what comes next," Alin admitted, her voice small. "What if I make a mistake? What if I fail?" Jack's expression softened. "That's the thing about being a leader. You won't always have all the answers. But you're not alone. You've got us, the humans, the Quesari, and your own people. You don't have to carry this weight alone." Alin took a deep breath, the weight of his words settling into her heart. She wasn't alone. She had people who believed in her now, people who saw her for what she had become. Not just the weak daughter of a king, but a warrior and a leader in her own right. "Thank you, Jack," she said softly, "for everything. I don't think I would have made it this far without your guidance." Jack smiled, his expression warm. "I've just been helping you see the potential that was always inside you." For the first time in a long while, Alin allowed herself to smile. It was small, but it was real. She wasn't the same person she had been when she first stepped onto this world. She had grown, learned, and become stronger, both on the inside and the outside. Days later, Alin stood before a crowd of both Terran and Quesari leaders. The ceremony was brief, but it marked the beginning of a new era. The alliance between the two races was solidified, and Alin had played a key role in bringing them together. But as she looked out at the gathered crowd, she realized that it wasn't just about the ceremony or the formal speeches. It was about the future that she would help build, a future where the two races could thrive together, united by strength, wisdom, and the leadership of those willing to put the greater good above their own. "We stand here today," Alin began, her voice steady, "not just as Terrans, Quesari, or Vrykans. We stand as allies, bound together by a common goal, to protect our worlds, our people, and our future. I know that there are challenges ahead of us, difficult moments that will test us all. But if we stand together, we will be unstoppable. Our strength lies not in our weapons, but in our unity." She paused, letting her words sink in. "I may not be the strongest warrior in the room, but I have learned that true strength comes from the heart, the courage to lead, to make difficult choices, and to fight for what is right. That is the strength that will carry us into the future." The crowd was silent for a moment before a ripple of applause began to spread. It was quiet at first, hesitant, but soon it grew louder. The humans, the Quesari, and even some of the Vrikan diplomats who had come to observe her speech were clapping. And in that moment, Aylin felt something she had never felt before, the deep, quiet certainty that she had done what she was meant to do. Her journey had been long and difficult. She had faced battles, doubts, and tests of her strength and character. But in the end, she had come through stronger than ever. She had not only proven herself to others, she had proven to herself that she was capable of leading, of bringing people together, and of fighting for a future worth living. As the ceremony came to a close, Aylin stood tall, her heart filled with hope for what was to come. She had a long road ahead, but she knew that with the strength of her people and the support of those who had come to believe in her, she would face whatever challenges lay ahead with courage and determination. For the first time in her life, Aylin knew that she wasn't just a princess. She was a leader, and the future was hers to shape.